Hello and welcome to Passing Priority. My name's Mike, and today I have a budget deck that every Commander player should have in their collection. Today our deck is powered by Gor Muldrak Amphinologist. Gor Muldrak is a 3-mana Simic legendary human scout who gives you and permanents you control protection from salamanders. And just in case our opponents aren't playing any salamanders, at the beginning of our end step, each player with the fewest creatures will create a 4/3 Salamander Warrior creature token. Our commander gives our opponents creatures, and the deck we've built will also give our opponents lands and cards. What we're building today is a budget group hug deck. But before we get into the deck, in the spirit of group hug, I'd like to do something for you. So in the comments below, if you could leave your commander or a deck idea you'd love to see built on the channel, we'll try and get round to it. But now that's out of the way, let's get on to our deck. Our deck features mostly around the pillars of Commander, that being ramp and card draw. And most of our ramp and card draw will either benefit just us or everyone in group hug style. Let's start off with some ramp that just helps us, because if we want to help everyone, we're going to need some mana to do it. To keep this deck budget, we're leaning on our green colour identity. We're running Rampant Growth, Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, and Circuitous Root. Also running a Simic Signet, and in our mana base we're running a Blighted Woodland, which we can sack to get some lands. To help everyone out, we're running Veteran Explorer, which is a 1/1 creature, and when he dies, each player can search for 2 basic lands and put them on the battlefield. This is a creature that our opponents will be happy to trade for us. And in case our opponents are having trouble finding lands, we're running Jungle Wayfinder and Borderlands Explorer, both creatures that will search basic lands from our deck to our hands. We're also running some ramp that will help our opponents out, but help us out a slight bit more. Tempt with Discovery will let every player go fetch a land, but for each of our opponents who do, we will go get a land. In a 4-player game, that's 1 land for them and 4 lands for us. Rootweaver Druid, on Enter the Battlefield, lets each of our opponents search for 3 basic lands. They get 2, and we get 1 of theirs. In a 4-player game, that's 2 for them, and we'll end up with 3. They may not be our colours, but we can always use them for generic mana, and we're running some big X spells we'll get onto later. And we're also running Spectral Searchlight, a mana rock that can add mana of any colour, but we can choose the player who gets it. So if one of our opponents is 1 mana short of doing something powerful, we can help them out. We also have some enchantments that will affect how much mana each person can generate. Dictate of Karametra and Heartbeat of Spring will double mana produced by lands. And we're also running Upwelling. In case our opponents can't use all that mana straight away, they can hold on to it and use it at a later date. Let's move on to some of our draw options. A lot of our draw benefits all players. We have some very small effects like Visions, Schemes and Words of Wisdom. We're also running Skyscribing, which will either be a big draw spell for X, or we can reveal it from a hand at each upkeep and pay 3 mana, and each player may draw an additional card. We're also running Flux, which is a card that will let players reset the cards that are in their hand. And Tales of the Ancestors is a card that will make each player's hand equal to the person with the most number of cards. But we've alluded to it before, we have some big X spells that will help us draw lots of cards. Prosperity and Fascination are 2 of our one-off X spells that will let each player draw X cards. Great if we've been able to save up some mana or ramp hard. Folio of Fancies serves double duty. It'll give each player no maximum hand size, so no matter how much they draw, they'll keep all those cards. And we can also pay XX and each player draw X cards. It also has an activated ability of 2 and a blue, and each opponent will mill cards equal to the number of cards in their hand. This, with enough draw, could potentially turn into a win condition for us, but that's not what this deck is focused on. We're running Dictate of Crufix to give each of our opponents another draw on their upkeep. Dracomystic and Gaia Reach Sanitarium will slowly work through our decks, hopefully drawing opponents into what they need, and making friends along the way. Otherworld Atlas is a great card if we have some counter-focused decks in our meta. We can tap to put a charge counter on it, but its other ability will let us tap and each player will draw a card equal to the number of charge counters. If we can convince our proliferating friends to share the love our way, we'll let everyone draw even more cards. We also have some draw effects that will benefit off of the creatures we give them with our commander. Every time a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, Karu Lair will let its controller draw a card. This is great as the salamanders we give have 4 power. We're also running Fecundity. Each time a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. This means that when we give out our creatures and when they die, we're giving our opponents more cards. Like with our ramp package, we have some draw effects that benefit us slightly more than they benefit their opponents. Kumena's Awakening is a great enchantment that starts off being a draw for everyone, but as the game progresses and we get the city's blessing, will become just an additional draw for us. And one of ideas will give each of our opponents an additional card on their draw step, but for us we'll end up with 2. We also have some draw cards that will shuffle graveyards back into libraries. This is great if an opponent needs something that's in their graveyard, but it's also great if the graveyard deck is getting out of hand. Game Plan actually lets our opponents help us out. We can get another player to assist with paying some of our generic mana. So if one player is really behind, they might want to sink mana into this to help us out. We're also running Commit to Memory. Commit is a great card, as it can return a spell or non-land permanent to its owner's library second from the top, being able to counter non-counterable spells and deal with pesky board permanents. But it's the sorcery we're talking about here. Each player shuffles his hand or library into his deck and then draws 7 cards. We also have some cards that fit into both ramp and draw. Rite of Flourishings will give each player an additional draw on their draw step, and let them play an additional land. With all the extra draw and land searching we're giving them, they should be able to hit this most turns. Ghirapur's Ori will also let them play an additional land, and if they start their turn with no cards in hand, they'll get 3. And Skullwinder in this deck is even better than Eternal Witness. We get a card back from our graveyard, and an opponent gets a card back from theirs, really sharing the love. While this deck seems to help our opponents, sometimes we need to let them help themselves. We're running cards like Horn of Greed. Whenever a player plays a spell, they may pay an additional 1, and if they do, they draw a card at the end of turn. And Unifying Theory costs 1 additional mana more per card, but they get those cards now. These cards are almost reverse Rhystic Study. You pay and you get the card. We're also running Pendant of Prosperity. We'll give this to opponent, and they'll get the choice of paying 2 mana to draw a card and put a land from their hand onto the battlefield, and then we get to do it. We can target the player who's having the hardest time, and while this will give them gas, it will also help us out. Another part of our game plan is to protect our opponents who are struggling, and we have a few different ways to do that. We're running some board wipes in the form of Aetherize and Washout. Aetherize will get rid of all attacking creatures, and Washout will remove all permanents of a colour of our choice. And given that our commander gives out blue salamanders that we have protection from, we're probably not going to choose blue most times. We're also running Druid's Deliverance. This is a fog effect, but it also lets us populate, meaning if we have a salamander, we can get an additional one. We're running a fun piece of removal in Eye of Doom. Each player will choose a non-land permanent when this card enters, and they will get a Doom counter. And when we like, we can pay 2 and sacrifice our Eye and destroy each permanent with a Doom counter on. Meaning we can work collectively to get rid of the biggest threats, or if we don't like what they choose, it just sits there and does nothing. But now we've got some single target removal. First up, we're running a fleet of counterspells. We have Arcane Denial, Negate and Stubborn Denial, all which will let us counter a big spell our opponent's trying to play. We also have some ways of dealing with permanents on the board, and all of our permanent removal will actually give away something to our opponents. Pongify will destroy a creature and leave them with a 3/3 ape. Reality Shift will exile a target creature, and then manifest the top card of their library. Beast Within destroys a permanent and gives them a 3/3 beast. Curse of the Swine exiles target creatures, and then for each one they get a 2/2 boar. Nature's Claim destroys an artifact or enchantment and will give them 4 life. Kenrith's Transformation will turn whatever we place under it into a 3/3 elf. And Anthem Mutineer is a great card that will get rid of a non-salamander and replace it with another salamander. And one other piece of removal we're running is Selesnya Eulogist. This is a lovely bit of graveyard hate that synergizes with our plan. For 3 mana we exile a creature card from a graveyard, but we get to populate, meaning we can fill our board with more salamanders. Which leads us to our last point. We are a group hug deck, but occasionally we might want to win. So how do we do that? We're running some draw effects that will benefit us solely, And these, a little like Carvu Lair, are based on our creatures entering. Elemental Bond, Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner, and Garruk Pack Leader will all draw us cards when our salamanders enter on our side of the board. And Garruk's Uprising does that, and gives our creatures trample as well. If our board starts to look a little large, and we want a bit of protection for ourselves, we're also running Sandworm's Convergence, which means that creatures with flying can't attack us or planeswalkers we control. And at the beginning of our end step, we're making a 5/5 worm token. If we have the fewest creatures, we can stack our triggers with the commander, so we get our salamander before we get our worm. Our main path to victory is going to be building up a large army of salamanders, and since our salamanders have protection from their salamanders, everything we give away won't be able to block us. We're running Second Harvest to double the number of tokens we have, and we're running Alpha Status, which will give one of our salamanders +2/+2 for each other salamander on the board. This includes all the salamanders we've given to our opponents. And to really push through damage, we'll finish off with an overrun. And there we have it, our budget group hug deck. This deck at time of recording comes to slightly over $50, and the list of all cards in the deck can be found in the description below. Thank you very much for listening, and remember, if you would like us to build a deck for a commander or strategy you would like, leave it in the comments below, and hopefully soon you'll see the deck on the channel. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye for now. Okay, that works. Good. Minimize. I need a second screen, really. Hey, I'm still recording at least. It's better than last time. Hooray!